All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out to Startup Boston Week. My name is Andy. I'm one of the organizers for this event. It's been a real pleasure to help put this together for the past few months or so. And this is actually my third year doing it. So at this point, I'm a veteran. It's become an annual tradition. Hopefully, this becomes a tradition for many of you out in the audience as well to attend or volunteer. Um, so what you'll see on my screen right now is a list of what's going on. So hopefully you meant to be in this stream for value stream demystified. If you did not mean to be in this session, you can go ahead and click away now. It's on the you can go to the agenda tab and go to hashtag famous or whatever else you're looking for. If you did mean to be here, we're so excited to have you because we got a great panel coming up. Um, so we have a great panel coming up. A lot of these people have great backgrounds and experiences. A big part of Startup Boston is learning from their background and experiences. So we encourage you to ask questions. That's a huge part of why we put this on. Really, we're doing these panels so that you can get your questions answered. And we try to think of what we can ahead of time, but we can't come up with everything. So to ask questions, we really encourage you to go over to the Q&A tab to your right and put your questions there. At the end of the session, there will be a Q&A that Tanish will develop, that will direct. I'll be looking at them. Tanish will look at them. I promise we will see them, and we will try to get to them. Also, we have an awesome social media competition happening right now. So part of this is, if you hear any insightful or interesting things that a speaker says during this session or another session, go ahead and post whatever they said as a quote on social media using the hashtag SBW2021, and I'll put that in the chat later. You'll be entered to win one of five $100 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston business, which is some great alliteration that you can tell all your friends that you won. So that's a fun little side thing. All right, well, I'm super excited, so I'm going to pass this off for Tanish to get started.
Thank you very much, Andy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your Wednesday evening with us here. We are running for the Startup Boston this panel on business hypothesis to production code. Now, that's a lot to cover. How do you go from an idea to actually building something and launching it? And today, I feel privileged to be joined by a wonderful class of leaders on the engineering business side, right here in our backyard in Boston. So I will be introducing them in a second. A bit of background on me first. So my name is Tanish Palla. I am currently an MBA candidate at Harvard University. Prior to HBS, I used to work at Cisco Systems and did product management at Rapid SOS. I'm a Boston guy. I grew up in Burlington, Mass. So really honored to be a part of this conference. I'm going to ask each of the panelists as well to tell me what they love about Boston and also what the most Bostonian thing they've done this summer is. So for me, the most Bostonian thing I've done this summer is yesterday I went to the Red Sox game. First time since COVID happened. Sox won. They beat the Mets. If you guys are watching it, close playoff race. So huge win. And just the atmosphere and environment back at Fenway was electric. So we want to bring that same enthusiasm that I saw at Fenway to this panel. So we're going to make it as interactive as possible. We'll have a poll launch in a minute so we can get to know a little bit about you and what you do to help set the stage for our panelists. And like Andy mentioned, the Q&A will be open. Please put your questions in there, and throughout the panel, when we get to the end, we will try to get to as many of those as possible. So without further ado, I would love for each of the panelists to just take a minute to introduce themselves. Who are you? What do you do? Tell us about your organization, the size, and remember to tell us what the most Bostonian thing you've done this summer is so far. So I will kick it off to Jordan to start.
Hello. My name is Jordan Bonds, and I'm the VP of Product for Brio Systems. Brio is about 30 people right now. I was full-time hire number 7, so we're still quite small. We have, I think, another thing you said in the prep doc was how many engineers are on the team. So there are 5 engineers at Brio currently. And the most Bostonian thing I've done this summer, I've spent a lot of time on the Esplanade, and I've spent a lot of time eating tater tots at whatever that place is that is selling the tater tots and serving beer on the Esplanade. You all know what I'm talking about? It's good tater tots. Get the miso aioli. That is good.
You're going to have to share the location in the chat because that's going to be a hot commodity tomorrow. All right, I'll kick it off to Brittany. Hey, Brittany, having some audio issues right now. We cannot hear you. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Right. Sorry. Now I get to be that person. I'm Brittany Greenfield, CEO and founder of Wabi. And, we help enterprises deploy continuous security as part of their CI/CD, so they don't have to make the trade-off between shipping secure code and velocity or agility. I've been in Boston since I graduated from college, stayed here for my MBA at Sloan. I'm on the board of Mass TLC as well. I'm a really big believer in the Massachusetts and Boston tech ecosystem. And on the vein of that, the most Boston I think I did this summer, in spite of all the rainy weather, was really leaning into the patio lets. Like, I've got a dog, spent some time on the patio supporting our local restaurants and small businesses. And I like to say that that's going to be a new Boston thing.
I love it. Yeah. And it's so sad. I didn't even realize today's the first day of fall. So it's good.
I'm not ready for that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Brittany. I'll kick it over to Dan.
Cool. Yeah. My name is Dan. I'm the VP of engineering at Drizzly. I started at Drizzly as the first engineer and helped to build just about everything. In the early days, I think today we're close to 350 people with almost 100 engineers and analytics folks. So we've come a little ways. Drizzly is, if you don't know about it, it's a alcohol e-commerce marketplace. So helping connect customers to retailers who can deliver you beer, wine, and spirits. And then most Bostonian thing I did this summer. So this is going to sound kind of sad, but I'm from New York, so like I spend most of my time making fun of Boston. I would say the most Bostonian thing I did was I kind of stopped doing that now that I'm kind of like a Bostonian now, and so I'm slowly converting. It's been tough, but I would say I'm no longer making fun of everything I see. So there you go.
I've been here a long time, and I moved here from New York, and I still make fun of Boston. So you just go.
It's so small.
Jordan, you need to drink more of the dirty water. Clearly, Dan has the concoction right.
I'm just going to remind you guys, as moderator, I have the privilege to kick people out of the meeting through the platform. So we're going to make this a Boston-friendly meeting. I know that's what our audience wants, but just kidding. Inclusive environment.
Well, you also did mention we should say what our favorite thing is about Boston. And lately, I have to say, the pandemic has made my relationship with Boston much better because it's a great place to walk and bike and be outside. So like, I'm feeling a lot more posy about it than I ever have.
Great to hear. All right, thank you guys all for introductions. Brittany, I don't know if we heard about the size of your organization.
Sorry, while I was muted. Yeah, so we're about 16 people now, but most of our team is engineers. Especially with the nature of what we do, integrating to the CI/CD. We're a very engineering heavy focused organization. We've been lucky to grow through the pandemic, and most of our team, except for one person on the engineering side, is located here in Boston.
Wonderful, thank you. So just to recap, guys, we have Wabi with 16 people, Jordan's team with 30 people, and then on the Drizzly side, 350 people. So wide range of sizes here. I'm going to run a quick poll if our audience can just fill it out, just so we can get a pulse check of who you guys are and what your role is, so we can make sure we ultimately do a great job with the questions we steer the session in. So the poll is now live. You should be able to see it just on the right side under chat, message, polls. I'll just let it run for another 15, 20 seconds as the results come rushing in. There we go. Just another 10 seconds, everyone. Please quickly fill out the poll coming up on the right. And here we go. Results coming in. So on this call, looks like we have 50 plus people on this call. We have the majority engineers, so 35% of your engineers on this call, 30% business, 15% product. 7% students, and 13% other. I'd love to understand the other, and we'll hopefully get that voice out in the Q&A as well. But very diverse group of people here, and we are going to be able to go through a lot in terms of the idea stage to the production code. So our first question that we're going to ask, and I'll kick this over to Brittany to start. There's definitely many different stages to taking in a product, taking an idea and starting with that idea and turning it into an engineering implementation. So we'd love to understand in your organization sort of those different steps to the pipeline from idea stage to engineering implementation.
Yeah, for us, I'm a big believer that the more you invest in something, the harder it is to say my baby's ugly. So we start, from scratch, and we have since we started the company. I actually, really for the better part of the first year of the company, we didn't actually have a product. We had wireframes, or some of them were interactive, some of them were my poor attempt at doing it. And so for us, we start first with our customers. That's always who we ask first. We may have some ideas, but especially being an early, young company, we don't go with an idea if we haven't run it by at least one customer. We then bring that into a wireframe. Sometime that is, don't think that you have to be doing this on Balsamic or some other fancy tool. PowerPoint does a great job of it. Or if you have the pleasure of being able to whiteboard it out and be in person with some of those customers, and we show them and we say, is this the right thing, right? And there is that balance that you're always playing between, sort of referee between what the customer says they want and what they actually need. But once we get that sign off and show them how we expect to present it, that's when we go ahead and pull it into our roadmap, pull it into our backlog. I think also one of the other things about being an early stage company is you are moving your backlog around a lot more often based off those customer demands. And we do reprioritize based off of that. We're never going to go completely off track. But, it is important when somebody says, hey, I really need this to make this work. Sometimes that's a sales related issue or just something that can bring you maybe a marketing opportunity. But we continue to evolve it, and we actually have multiple staging environments even after our development. So we have sandbox environments where our customers that have identified this as a concern, that they can go play around with it and provide feedback to us. We then even enable them with their own sandbox environments to test out some use cases before we ever take it to production. And we're constantly iterating on that, right? So one thing we invested in early was a support system and a ticketing system so we can manage those feature requests and that feedback in a systemic way.
That's great feedback. And one of my takeaways from there, it's not awesome, was just that sandbox environment for your customers. I'm sure we'll hopefully get into this a little bit later, but to get that feedback directly and see how they use the product to help the iterations of it sounds like a great experiment and testing tool.
For sure, early days we implemented usage analytics, so we would know, right, what people say that they're doing is often very different than what they are actually doing, and it allows them to also prove themselves wrong sometimes. Sometimes they go, why didn't you put the widget in the upper right corner? And then you realize that they're constantly going to it. But if you want to go back to some old school stuff too, even before the sandbox environment, a piece of paper with a printout of your UI and the bingo things are great things. Where do you want to click for this, right? I've done that. I've worked in large enterprises, small startups, and it always wins when you can get your customers around the table. Of course, in the last year, we've had to innovate in some of those ways too.
Great perspective. Jordan, I'd love to hear from your perspective at Brio as well.
I'm guessing there's not going to be a whole lot of variation here. The details might vary, but it's a pretty well-worn path. Get something on paper or into some kind of like graphic asset if it's something that people are going to be clicking on or looking at as soon as you possibly can. It's really remarkable how much just merely describing a feature verbally can lead you down a very confusing path, because you think you mean one thing and someone else thinks you mean something else. And if you go from that verbal conversation to production code, you might be very sad about what happens. But, get something drawn, get something like, it doesn't matter what, draw it on a napkin, draw it on a whiteboard, make it in Figma, whatever. Get people discussing that as quickly as possible so that you build context together and you don't just get off the rails. And bring engineering into that conversation ASAP as well, because they're going to have ideas about it that are super duper valuable. And get it in front of customers. If you can make it clickable, if you've got a sandbox environment, fantastic. If you don't, I make videos of something in staging all the time and send it around to customers, and they can yay or nay it. But basically just show it to as many people as you can, talk about it as much as you can, and get feedback as soon as you can so that you don't waste your time in a rabbit hole, like over designing something that is not even what anybody wants or was talking about. That's like what you're trying to avoid.
And one of the things you just said about bringing engineering in as soon as possible, it's something we realized we had a gap in over the last year, where there were natural opportunities when we'd have some of these customer calls pre-remote work to say, hey, just come sit in and listen on this call. And we were good about saying, hey, we just got off of this call. Here's the feedback on it. But until we realized that we actually had one or two members of the team sitting on the customer feedback call, it's a little game of telephone too. So don't forget about that. And it's not hard nowadays.
It's also going to depend a lot, I think. There's the folks building this, and there's customers, but there's often a whole other host of stakeholders that you want to involve in these conversations. For instance, at Brio, customer support is really critical, getting their perspective on this, like how they are going to have to support a feature. They are going to have very good intuitions about that. They always spot something or think through something in a different way than any of us have. And so the soonest I can get them in that conversation, it's valuable as well.
I think just to add on to that, I think getting things just out to production early as fast as possible is the key. Like I think everyone probably agrees on that, because even with as much involving the customer and asking them all these things, it's one thing if you ask, like we experience this all the time at Drizzly, where we ask them like, would you order from here? Would you use a gifting feature? And a lot of times in surveys and whatnot, customers are very agreeable. They're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like send it out. But what's actually going to happen? Are you actually going to be able to change consumer behavior? Is just TBD. So the only way to know that is to get it out as quickly as possible. And so I think MVPs are always the way to go. I think sometimes where it falls off the rails is agreeing on what's M and what's V, like what is minimum, what's viable. And I think people might have different opinions there, but ultimately you're really never going to know until you get to production.
Great feedback. And I think it's important for the audience to note too, the different business models of each of the organizations here. Correct me if I'm wrong, with Brittany and Jordan being more B2B, correct? And then Dan being more on the B2C side. Is that correct?
I think it's both B2C and B2B, because we have relationship with the customers who are like us, who purchase alcohol, as well as the retailers. So a little bit B2B and B2C.
Very good to know.
We also have, we have end users in our system that we have a relationship with. It's a real messy group of user personas. So it is B2B. The business model is certainly B2B, but there are end users that we interact directly with as well.
Yeah, and for us, we're on the enterprise side, so that's where sort of that sandbox piece comes in. We've got, and also why you have to spend a lot of time doing research in advance, because we're talking about integrations into their build critical systems and everything, and you get that wrong, it also requires a lot of buy-in. So that's why we spend a lot of time on the upfront side before we put fingers to keyboard.
Great. And so let's just get right into sort of, this is kind of, teething around the topic around experimentation. So would love for each of you to kind of think about experimentation within your organizations. Heck, if you want to give yourself a grade in terms of how you think your team is at doing experiments, we kind of talked about sort of those initial phases for many of you. Give yourself a grade in your organization on, how you think you do in experimentation today. And then things you do that you're proud of, or things you want to do that will hopefully bring you to an A+. So I will start this one with. Let's start this one with Dan.
Well, I don't think I'll ever grade anything that I'm involved with with an A, just because I like to be critical of ourselves. So I'll go with the B. I think our culture definitely, everything is an experiment. Like everything goes out as an A/B test. And so like everything we view as like if this works, we'll invest further in it. If it doesn't work, we're okay to scrap it. Just kind of like I said earlier, like we rolled out a lot of things thinking this is what the customer wants. But like even now today, I mean, I've been at Drizzly for 8 years when nobody knew about it. But even today, when we send out polls around like, did you know alcohol delivery is legal? Like majority of people still say no. And a lot of places, in cases, it is still illegal. So like for us, everything has to be an experiment because we're just not sure like what consumer behavior is gonna react. So like for an example, I think recently, this is actually a while back, but guest checkout is probably the one I can remember best. You would think that guest checkout is something that would just raise conversion rates and help people through the funnel because you remove the obstacle of sign up, which is true, but it comes with other obstacles like there's higher fraud, there's lower repeat rates, you lose the ability to market to them afterwards. And so everything has to be an experiment to like weigh out the pros and cons of every hypothesis as to whether it's worth going deeper on.
Very good comment, and thanks for refraining. Is always growth. So I admire that. Jordan, over to you.
I mean, similarly, everything is an experiment for us, but I would say we're at an even more kind of early stage of that, which is that, Brio mostly is focused on COVID testing right now. And that market, as individuals living through a pandemic, we feel like this has been going on forever. But as far as like market dynamics go, this is a brand new, chaotic, frothy market, right? And so we're doing a ton of experimentation around like what it is we're even selling and what it is people are even buying and who it is our customer is. It's like all up for grabs, like constantly and like week over week. So certainly everything is an experiment. I would absolutely not give us an A either. I mean, I think I'm the kind of person that just wouldn't, but like, I don't even know how to grade us, frankly, at this point. I'm not even sure it's well-defined of a space enough to know. But I would say that the thing I wish we were we had the time and the space to instrument better is doing stuff like A/B tests. And we have built something on top of a very chaotic brand new market so quickly that we barely are instrumented to even know how successful it is. And hearing you two talk about like A/B testing and like sandboxing, I'm just, my like mouth is watering. I'm like, I would just love to be in a position to do that right now. And I have been in past products I've worked on, for sure. And it really just depends on where you're at and the place the market's at. I'm not trying to be too harsh on us, but like, if you have the space and the forethought to bake that stuff in from the jump, it just makes you that much better at learning from the experiments. Doing the experiment, step one, great. But like enabling everyone to learn from it is sort of like, a very important step two that I think we could be doing, much better at than we are.
Now, do you think that's great feedback, Jordan? And of course, like there is definitely urgency in what your company does and capturing that like market. So totally makes sense. Do you feel like it's partly been neglected because of culture, because of people, because of timing? Like, do you feel like it's something that if that precedent was set earlier, even though it's such a timely market opportunity, that maybe there will be that culture to still do it?
Yeah, absolutely, there will be. It's really just been a matter of timing and sort of what we've had to build to capture the market as it shifts. And I mean, resource constraint is real anywhere, anytime, but at a startup, it's just extreme. And so the choice is always like, new business, build this thing that we know will capture some new emerging thing that we weren't capable of capturing before in terms of value, or like shore up the thing that we've built. And because the market is moving so quickly, we have no certainty that shoring up the thing that we've built is going to be valuable, actually, right? So we're still in this like sort of hungry hippo phase of just like biting off more and more of the market. and like we'll figure out how to shore it up later, you know. So I think it's way more just about timing and circumstance, and the culture and the skill set is absolutely here. We just haven't had time to execute.
Very interesting. It must also be interesting for you as a product leader to think about sort of what is next, you know, probably post COVID and whenever hopefully that may be. But would love to get your thoughts on that a bit later. So Brittany, would love your thoughts as well.
Well, when you said that, and Jordan alluded to this as well, I laughed because if you don't think a startup is one big experiment, then you need to reacquaint yourself with what startup life is. So we're either doing an A+ or an F, because also, as Jordan mentioned, right, resource constraint is real. You know, there's always something that needed to be done yesterday, and there's always something new that needs to be done today. And, you know, so, you know, we're probably somewhere in the middle given on the day, but where we've found success in experimentation, and it's something, our culture is there, the desire to do it is there. It's just the outward demands of our team. But, you know, where and also, as I mentioned before, our experimentation has to happen in a slightly different place in the product life cycle, because by the time we ship it even into a sandbox environment, it's going to take some effort and got to be pretty robust. But you know, we use some milestone events to drive those innovation and experimentation. So, for example, the beginning of the year, RSA, also a Massachusetts company, every year sort of picks their top 10 next big startups. We were lucky enough to be named as one of them, and we had to give a new demo, or we had to give a demo. So, of course, we said all those things we've been talking about. Experiment, go come up with the best version of what you think that is. And we pulled it together, and that's our latest UI, our next generation. And if we didn't have a little bit of that forcing function and adrenaline, we would have petered along for a long time. But that was where we both brought out all the best components of experimentation, right? PowerPoints first, wireframing, people being willing to, you know, sometimes cobble things together, or, you know, good, you know, even creativity and innovation in what our demo set, right? We're Stark Industries, you know, and telling a story with that. So, you know, I would like to bring more of those kinds of events in. You know, it's lovely to get to talk about hackathons or something like that. I'm a big believer in sort of those active recovery opportunities, you know, experimentation, hackathons, whatever they are. It's one of those things where sometimes you have to remember to get out of the weeds to spend time to do it.
Very interesting. I think for the people that respond on the poll as students, it probably feels like a deadline for school and having a paper due, and that kind of, you all start working towards that milestone when there's a due date, and it's a good forcing function for
adrenaline is the best get it done function you could ever have.
Wonderful. So we'll jump to the next question. So in terms of you know, how you actually decide which ideas to implement and sort of move into that next step, how do you guys measure? Do you have a measuring system to actually evaluate ideas against each other to determine priority? I know some people on the product side use things like victory points. There's a bunch of other, you know, nomenclature and ways to view this. So would love your thoughts around, you know, how you actually think about scoring these ideas. What metrics are you, what are you scoring it? What is the unit of measure? Is it revenue? Is it usage? What have you? And then how do you stack rank that? Jordan, I would love to start with you here.
Yeah, so I'm going to be a real like broken record here a bit, but like things are very chaotic over here, and it's defining value even to evaluate these things is often shifting. So it's like it's an really interesting sort of problem. And every time we've like developed a metric, it just sort of like evolves into something that's not so useful. But at a high level, and this has been true on any product I've worked on, I mean, there's like business level metrics, right, which matter to everybody. It's like, you know, revenue and it's retention and it's like the standard stuff. And it's really like how you define that second tier of things that feed up into those typical business metrics that are where you are developing your own sort of system of evaluating why this now and not this and maybe never this, right? It's like set of features to decide what to do with your limited resources. And it's developing that is, I think, like one of the biggest challenges in delivering product. It's like how are we going to achieve revenue growth? How are we going to achieve retention rate growth? It's not really just giving yourself some kind of random goal of like, you know, but 100% retention rate next quarter, like what cool? Like, yeah, I would love that too, man. That sounds nice. It's like that second order set of things and defining them and breaking them down. That's really the challenge. And for us anyway, it's right now really shaken out as like, you know, capturing more of that market on the one hand, and then doing whatever we can to defray risk on the other. And for us, because we're working in a healthcare adjacent sort of situation, it has to do with like security risk and compliance risk and a bunch of other things. But there's also just like the systems risk. Like we all carry around a bunch of like technical debt and product debt. And that's, you know, I think of it as like a fuse attached to a bomb, and it's a fuse with a length that I may or may not know, just burning away in the back of my mind. And I've got that list of things, right? But making that conversation productive with the rest of the company is all about a common framework for evaluating. Like your set of bombs in your brain are a different set than mine. And we have to have some common terms on which to negotiate which bomb is going to win this week, this sprint, right? Whatever. And I think it really just goes back to the business value. You have to find bedrock somewhere for where you're finding the value of what you're doing. And you have to be relating back to that as frequently as you can. And like at a startup, it's damn near daily rather than like quarterly, which I think at a later stage company, it's like you check in quarterly. Are we, you know, benchmarking against like, no, that is far too long at a startup. It's like weekly if you're lucky, but like for me, it's really daily. I have, you know, we make our roadmap along value streams, and each thing we might do hopefully overlaps with a bunch of them, right? That's a really good indicator that something is valuable. But I have that thing open. Like I only don't have it open at this moment right now because I closed my browsers to be in this, you know, workshop. But like I have it open all the time, and I'm looking at it thinking, is this valuable? Is this valuable right now? Is this the most valuable thing we could be doing right now? And I'm talking to the team about that. But again, the hard work for that is deciding what those things are. Why do we find the things valuable that we find valuable, and how do we keep each other in context so that we share that? Because otherwise the conversations become unhavable about which thing to prioritize. So that was like a very messy, not tidy answer to your question, but I think it was real.
If I can jump on to that, I'll provide the other side of that because it's very similar. You gave that, and I'll provide the CEO's perspective. So I'm not the head of engineering. My head of engineering has those little bombs going off in his head every time I call him, like, hey, so I was talking to a prospect today. And he goes, oh, dear God, right? And so what we've done, I'm going to give the flip side of what Jordan just described, is we set OKRs, right? That may feel very big company, but the reality is that you still need those bedrocks in place. And we say, what are our big boulders, right? Those can't move. But, you know, we're not saying like in a large company that might be shipping v6.6.3, right? But for us, we say our boulder is X number of customers or Y number of media mentions or something like that. And so when we do start to have that day-to-day triage sometimes, are you sure you want me to do this? Because that means this is going to slip not just to the next sprint, but for another month. You know, it helps give us a little bit of that guiding lens to say, is this what's really going to get us to that next big milestone? And we set our OKRs quarterly, and we do sort of set a 6-month roadmap. Doing anything past that for 6 months, like just right, it at least gives us a little bearing. Like you're sailing in the Atlantic Ocean versus the Pacific, but other than that, but we actually set midway markers, so that way we don't get to the end of a quarter and say, hey, we totally missed that customer acquisition piece because we got so focused on updating our database or something like that, right? And so that's sort of the lens we take on it. It's not quantifiable for sure, especially at a startup, right? For the data geeks like myself out there, you can't evaluate something in a model for which the model hasn't previously been tested on, right? It doesn't include that data set. So that's a startup. So we would have no way of assigning that, but it allows us to remove some of the squishiness of, oh dear God, what do I do tomorrow? And make sure that we're all, I think, not just in the engineering team, but the entire organization is rowing in the same direction at the same rhythm, even if we may, say, okay, now we're going 29 degrees east instead of 1 degree north. And that's really sort of what we use as our bearing.
Love it. And just for the audience, for those who don't know, OKRs is just objectives and key results. So, setting KPIs, marching to those key performance indicators. Dan, anything to add?
I would just say the resourcing thing is real, and it never gets easier. Like when we were 3 people, we were like, oh my God, if we just had 5 engineers, it would be easy. And then when we had 10, we were like, I remember thinking, like, if we just had 20, like, what would we even do with 20 engineers? And now we have like close to 100. And like the talks are still tough because it is hard to measure things like a database upgrade versus something that potentially drive value versus like something for security or something for privacy. It is hard to weigh them against each other. But yeah, it is a tough conversation every day, week, month, quarter, whatever your planning cadence is.
So can you give us an example, Dan? Because I actually felt that problem too when I worked at a Series B startup, Rapid SOS, and I think there might be that transition point as you get towards a bit later stage. You have those 50 plus engineers. So would love to get an insider view on how you think about some of those maybe more technical debt decisions and how to work through those versus business value, how you go about those conversations with your team.
So I think the answer to almost every question is it depends, and depends a lot on your culture and your org and what product you're doing. Like Drizzly can get away with some things because we deliver alcohol, but we're not like building a space shuttle. And so there's times where we can not to cut corners, but we can take risks in certain areas, and other areas we cannot. I think to me the most important thing is a really strong relationship with your engineering leads and your product leads, all the way from the top all the way through the bottom, because essentially you guys have to make decisions every single day. And when in cases where this relationship is really tense, these conversations are really tough. And I think as a whole, you make suboptimal decisions, and a lot of it just becomes more political than it needs to be. When you only have 10 to 15 people, you can't afford to have 3 people not getting along with each other. And so I think this is where conversations need to be. There needs to be a lot of trust, because I think most product managers won't really understand what is the value of a Ruby upgrade, right? And the engineering manager has to also understand what is the value we're actually delivering to the customer, and there's a balance there, right? And that balance needs to happen like literally every single day. So I think if you have that relationship and you have that trust, that's where I've seen these conversations go smoothly. You have to make hard decisions sometimes, and one of you has to break the news to stakeholders. But in the opposite case, where that relationship and that trust is not there, it's a mess.
I think those arguments are makeable though. How I've been successful at making arguments for infrastructure upgrades or just things that are not immediately valuable is to map out the risk of not doing them against something we do want that is immediately valuable. Actually show in a workflow diagram of some kind, like a swim lane diagram, or I don't know what, that if we do this thing now, Ruby upgrade, whatever, right? Here's what it enables by this period of time that will get pushed out until we do this thing, right? Find the thing that the stakeholder in question wants and relate what it is you want to that thing. Because they are all interconnected. It's not, sometimes it's not clear, for sure. But I think often there is a connection, and these things there's also the risk of not doing it. Well, what happens if we don't do it? For how long? And it's sort of if it's a security upgrade of some kind, okay, you want to keep rolling that dice every day? I don't think you do. Here's what that risk is every single day. You can actually make those arguments, and it really depends on what it is and what the trade-offs are. But I think connecting those dots, I think that's a lesson I have to remind myself about a lot, which is that maybe those dots are clear in my head, but they're probably not clear in anyone else's, right? If I've got some narrative, it really helps. And this goes back to I think the first question you asked, which was just get it on paper, get a diagram, get a sketch, something, whether it's your roadmap or like why you might want to do this project now as opposed to later, or whether it's some feature you're doing for users. Like, get something out there in the world that everyone can talk about, because otherwise, what are you talking about? You don't know. You actually don't know if you are even talking about the same thing, you know?
Yeah, it's so important. I think the tying back is really important too. You know, a horror story of that from a previous startup I've worked at. By the time I joined the company, and I was, mid hundreds or so when I joined. So, good commercial traction. But they'd made a decision very similar to not doing an upgrade, that the way that the product got developed afterwards, or left it on a certain kind of infrastructure, which when we went to go implement a new feature that our market needed, it was cost prohibitive. It would have cost, only a few of our customers could have paid for it, and they only would have paid for it for compliance reasons. And that's also not a good customer, just because they can pay for it, that's also not a good customer value prop either. And so there was development going on it. And after about 3 months of development to try to bring this $1 million or, Acme product out, we had to scratch it 2 weeks before release. Right. And they've never been able to build it in as far as I've understood since then. Right. So it's important, especially I think in the startup, because the pace of things, I don't have time to sit down and do that decision tree and see how this plays out. Go play that game of chutes and ladders and say this decision today impacts this goal tomorrow.
Great insight there, everyone. So surprisingly, we're actually only have 15 minutes left in the session. I know it's flying by. So I'm going to ask one more question for each of our panelists. And please, everyone, we want to save the last 10 minutes for Q&A. So I know we have one question in there right now. Please use this time to add some more questions in the Q&A. And hopefully we can spend the last 10 minutes just going through a lot of your questions so we can hear your voice as well. So my final question to kind of each person in this panel, of course, in the audience, there's a lot of engineers, a lot of product, a lot of students, a lot of people aspiring to either, be in similar positions like yourself, to work at your startups, and to ultimately, looking up to you as leaders. So what advice do you have for us sort of that are interested in working in startups like yours, whether they be engineers, product people, or business leaders? Would love for your thoughts on, speaking to the audience and really giving some tangible advice, either in terms of, how to join startups, or in terms of, how to explore your own ideas and really take control of your passion. We'll start over with Brittany.
I'd say the first, this is true of any job you go to, but especially startups, you need to make sure you're as passionate about what the company's doing as the founder is. Because if you aren't, it's not the right place for you. I've gone into a startup where I was not passionate about the mission, and that was a mistake, right? I could appreciate the work that they were doing, but, I couldn't give it my all. And anybody that's working at a startup, you need to give your all, right? It's all hands on deck. And all hands on deck is sometimes, even if you're an engineer, everybody's sitting in the conference room stuffing some envelopes or something for a marketing campaign. And, that helps you. And it's also going to help you get through the tough days. I'd say that's the number one thing if you're looking to work for a startup. Do not go just for the brand name, buzziness, whatever. Make sure it's something that you're committed to. Now, to find those startups, I think especially this is one of the things that's special about Boston. Boston gets a little hit on for being a small community, right? But and our New Yorkers are laughing, right? But it's a close environment and network. And it may not be the person that you talk to tomorrow that helps make an introduction, but generally we can sort of help you feel it out. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm interested in A, I'd like to be doing why. Do you know anybody that's doing that? And you may have to go through 5 conversations, but eventually you'll get there. And the other great thing about the Boston and Massachusetts tech ecosystem is everybody's willing to help out because somebody's helped them out before. So don't be afraid of it. Just if you reach out, if I'm not to speak for the other panelists, but I'm pretty sure you guys have our LinkedIn information. So if you reach out to us, tell us why you're reaching out. give us a mission for you, because other people have gone and supported our missions before too. And I think that's what's unique about the startup community, not just the tech community.
I love that. I hope that inspired people more than made them afraid to do startups, because the goal of this isn't to we're here to inspire you guys. And I totally resonate with that, Brittany. It's all about passion for startups, and trying to really be excited about what you're working for is very important to understand if it's right for you. Jordan, would love your thoughts here as well.
I mean, everything Brittany said for sure. And Boston is such a great community to be in that regard. People are really helpful, really want to help each other. Just, talk to folks, reach out. It's always been great for me. It's been a great community for me. Definitely echo you got to be passionate about this, because this is not a clock in at 9:01, clock out at 4:59 kind of thing at all. I would add to it, like if you're looking to just sort of like internalize the workflow and the cadence of this kind of work, like make something, have an idea, figure out how to make it. And I mean that as broadly as it sounds. Like that's going to give you the best experience of what getting a product out into the world feels like. I mentor folks on like user experience design and product management, and I'm always just like, come up with an idea, do the sketches that we talked about, do the wireframing, talk to people. Would you click on this? Would you buy this? Do the research. You can just invent a thing. It's awesome. It's so great. Do it. It will give you a sense of what part of that process you like the most. And then you can start to specialize on whatever that is. But like, if you're a student now and you're just starting out, or you want to switch careers and you're like, I don't have a portfolio, whatever, make a thing, have an idea. Even if it's an idea that already exists, even if you're like, you know what, Drizzly's fine, but I could do it better. Make a Drizzly thing, like product prospectus. Drizzly, but better because of blah, because the logo is actually a pineapple. I don't know what. Like, just have an idea, go through the process of it, get something out there. It'll give you a sense of how much you enjoy this work, and it will probably light a fire under you, because I think it's really fun. And I think more people should do it. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful. Dan, you're about to get a 50 designs on a better Drizzly in your inbox.
They're all going to be pineapples too. Yeah, I would probably echo everything I said. Usually my advice for folks early in their careers is to join a startup in general, just because the breadth of experience you get is unsurpassed anywhere else. And you're just exposed to so many things, and just like makes you very well-rounded wherever you are in your career. And then I kind of have to like agree with both of the previous ones. Like it is life-changing to work for a company that you believe in the passion, you believe with the passion in what they're doing. It changes like your Sunday nights from dreading of going to work and like hitting your alarm clock in the morning to like actually like thinking about work or what you're planning to do this week. And a lot of times when you go out with your coworkers for drinks or whatever after work, you end up you end up talking about the product itself. In some cases, in other companies, you're like, you get to the bar and you're like, okay, no talking about work. Whereas in a company that you do really enjoy, you get to the bar and you're talking about like what you're gonna do tomorrow and like how we could have done things a little bit better. It's completely life changing in terms of like your just day-to-day happiness. And then I probably also agree with Jordan. Like if you have some idea or anything, it's definitely worth making it. I think there's no role that exists where being a little bit technical doesn't help. A little technical, and it can be analytical, it can be like SQL, it can just be macros in Excel, or if you know a little bit of programming, that is always helpful. You don't need to be like schooling your engineers on what they should be doing, but just being able to read data sets and result sets is always going to be beneficial. So if you have the opportunity, definitely apply some of that logic skills.
I love all the insights, everyone. So again, a reminder to please put in any Q&A you have in the chat window. So our first question is by Swabarna Mukherjee. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. He's focused on asking around sort of investor relations and measuring market sentiment. So do any of you sort of have any examples of where your investor had measured market sentiment due to which you had due to potentially pivoting or changing strategy, and how you sort of handled sort of the investor relations side and potentially conflict in terms of your vision versus maybe what you sold them on, or the disagreements they may have around your strategy.
I'll jump in a little bit on here. There's no perfect answer to it. So first of all, your job is to be ahead of what the investors are thinking on the market sentiment, right? Your job is to know what the market's trending on. That's one of the most valuable assets, other than your company, that you can be to the investors, always bringing that information to them. So for us, the market's been growing and evolving. And if you're not familiar with like a Gartner hype cycle, our market is now sort of in the tail end of the hype cycle, called the period of enlightenment, aka it's starting to finally be a real thing that we can start to tie some hard numbers to. So what I would say, I think the word pivot has gotten overused a lot, and also I think people use it as an excuse to say my first idea was bad and my second idea is better. So we've made sure that all the changes we make are really an evolution of our story. I always say, what is our real story? Take the time very, very early on to sit down and say, what's your mission and your vision? And those things should really sort of stay the same, even if how you execute on it in the product pivot, it changes over time. And our mission and vision, we may have changed some of the terminology, but at the core, it's the same. So it's allowed us to see an investor last year and then see an investor this year, or because it's not just your current investors, it's the ones that you've been meeting over all these years that you have to explain why the product suddenly looks different. And so if you tie it to that story of here are the sort of small steps we're taking, and here's where we got customer feedback, right? All that sort of stuff, then it lands a little softer as well.
Thank you, Brittany. Jordan, Dan, anything else to add?
Yeah, we haven't.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying we haven't really had to. I think Brittany makes really good points. I mean, you're going to have more than one investor as well, right? And you have your current round, your future rounds, and so like I think I would agree that pivot is kind of overused. I think Drizzly has changed strategy in some cases. Like I think if you think about just Drizzly overall, you're just like, I'll just get as many consumers as possible. But then you realize that we're actually completely backed by our liquor stores. And so we've had to shift from like a really aggressive B2C strategy to like, how do we get more retailers? How do we bring on these larger enterprise retailers and brands? So we've had to shift our strategy towards being more the B2B side. But it didn't come at the direction of an investor of like, who's like, hey, I think you guys should just completely change and do this. But I think there's definitely a lot of considerations there, because you're likely going to have a whole board of investors, not just a single one, and it's usually like it's a bigger decision than that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of direct experience with that particular situation, which is why I'm not saying anything. But I mean, the broad brushstrokes apply, which is that like, it's not your investor's company at root. Like if you're the founder, like you have to make the tough choices, and you have to, like Brittany said, make sure that they're staying in line with what it is you founded this company to do. And if you're not making that argument well to the investors, okay, that's one thing. That's something to think about. But ultimately, it is sort of like, a choice you got to make.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember the mission of the company, like you mentioned, Jordan. Like, what is the thing that you set out to do, and keeping that true to the decisions you make around that. Let me see if there's another question. I do want to save a minute just for each of you to give some final remarks before Andy hops back on. So let us use this time to just do a quick recap of this session. I think it'd be good to just spend the last couple of minutes doing that. So we'd love to just quickly go around to each of you, just talk about some of the key takeaways that you have from this session, or that you want to really hone in on the audience to remember as they depart into their first day of fall. Let's start with you, Brittany.
I'd say three things. One, for those, we all hit on it, about a career in startups. career in startups at the end of the day is about passion. Dan said it well, being technical, and don't confuse being technical with having to write code. It's being analytical. It's bringing logic to it. And when you can combine that with your passion, you'll have a great career at whatever startup you go to, no matter what happens to the startup. Two, make sure from the product development side, feedback early and often. And feedback is not from your own echo chamber, right? You can give yourself a lot of that. Get it in front of people that would never use your product. Don't be afraid of really getting out there. I alluded to it earlier. We didn't have a product for the first year. And if we'd built the product we'd started with, we would have just been dead in water. And we have a competitor that essentially built that product, and they're just hanging out. And we were able to pivot. I call it a 45-degree turn because we were close enough, but we spent a lot of time in Excel documents, wireframes, whiteboards, and all that sort of stuff before we really realized what the solution to the problem was that we were solving. And then I'd say, the last is prepare for uncertainty with some kind of consistency. We all hit on it, right? Stick to your mission. Know what you're working towards. Sometimes those come out in more granular quarterly, weekly goals. Other times it's just the big company mission. And if you always keep those in mind, your team will be on the same page, and things will change, and you'll be able to stay a little calm under the surface with fewer bombs going off in Jordan's head. But thank you guys for having me here today. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Prepare for uncertainty. Love that. Dan?
Yeah, my takeaway is Drizzly's getting to the point where compared to some of these other folks, we're not even really a startup anymore. I guess we kind of use the label startup when it's convenient, but I guess when we have 100 engineers, I don't know if we can really call ourselves a startup anymore. I think Brittany did a really good job kind of summarizing. I think I don't even know if I had anything. I would just say startups. I would say the one thing is startups are going to have really significant ups and downs, and it is sometimes either going to feel like it's going to end, and sometimes it can actually be pretty close. But they make for some pretty good stories later. I think we get together pretty often and talk about some of the close calls we had, and it makes the journey really worth it. So it can be really tough at times, but that's kind of why we all signed up for this, as opposed to picking a cushy 9-to-5 job and in a much larger company. But I think it's worth keeping that perspective in mind that it's going to be worth it at some point.
Thank you, Dan. Jordan?
I was going to kind of bring it back to the title of this session, which I thought was just like fantastic, which is everything you do in a startup is a business hypothesis. It's always a sort of bet you're making, and then a bunch of things you're putting in action to test that bet. And then the insights you gain from those tests are just, cycling right back into what it is you're building. And it's always focused on the value you're trying to bring. Like, what is the value of what you're doing? Always be asking yourself that. Like, why are you doing it? What is it that you're doing? And, and really treat it, the entire thing, as a company, down to like a specific feature that you're implementing, as an experiment. Like, what's the hypothesis you're testing? And what do you think is going to happen? And how will you know if it does? And how will you know if it doesn't? And yeah, everything that Brittany and Dan said also holds true, which is just that, like, there's going to be times where you're scraping the bottom. You can't figure out if it's going to keep going or not. But if you've got the passion for the problem that you're solving, like, there's nothing you can't do.
Thank you so much. And a great way to end it. Again, yeah, business hypothesis to production code. So it's tying it back into essentially that's what a startup is, like Jordan said. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for such an engaging conversation. It was my privilege to host this. And now I'll pass it back to Andy.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for having such a wonderful panel today. Hopefully you in the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And I was going to say goodbye, but I think I'd rather say see you later. because we have many events coming up later this week, and I hope that you, like myself, will be watching more of them. We're done for today, but if you check the agenda for tomorrow and Friday, we have plenty of more good stuff coming up. So thank you again to our wonderful panelists who spent not just their time now, but also time prior to this preparing for the event. And thank you to all the organizers who made this possible. This is a completely volunteer-run event and organization. So thanks again, and we hope to see you all soon.